with most of you who have been experienced attacks on your economics in different angles, whether you have investment or whether you have business, or fraudulent taxation, etc. And you see people having a lot of conversation about the politics, but when talking to many of the people, you recognize that they don't know the history of the politics operating at North America in contemporary times. So we're going to give you a little synopsis about the Whittemore Party, and also we suggest that you take notes. And in the future, we're going to deal with a little bit more details in these matters. And also, one of the things that I want to emphasize to you is the misconception that people have of separating the political atmosphere of North America, Central and South America of the continent, of the Maghreb, that's Morocco, the most extreme west, the North Gate, the central part where the old Mexican rulership has its root, and also with Iberia, which you know as Europe, and also the connections of the politics to us here that has come down to this present time that has caused much confusion. So while we can't go through all of it, we'll give you notes and some things for you to research in order to upgrade your consciousness on the actuality of the politics. Also, the motivations of many of the people in the secret societies who have been operating at North America and promoting their unum sanctum agendas of colonial operations of the hybrid European hegemony around the world. And so, in order to understand the politics that's been operating here, you must have a broader concept of the actual parties that have been deceptively operating at North America, i.e., the Whigamores. Now, for one to more properly comprehend the complexities and the deceptive nature of the political parties operating at North America and under the United States political jurisdiction in these contemporary times, one must have some knowledge about the Whigamore Party. The misinformed people among us are most familiar with the two monopoly protected parties, symbolized by an elephant for the Republicans, which is the Republican Party, and symbolized by a donkey for the Democrats, which is the Democratic Party. Now, these are controlled political schism parties veiled in historical and political deception. While there are other political parties operating at North America, these are not the focus of this treatise, as they have been almost completely excluded from real or actual effective participation via de facto structures, engineered schisms, and the obviously entrenched and anti-constitutional corruption. In context with and in association with the operations of the Whigamores at North America, all neophytes and scholars may and should review the associated political connections to the Napoleonic Wars. Now, these wars spanned the years 1803 to 1815. Also, as a backdrop on the political atmosphere and influences at North America and the occupational colonization operations, etc., influenced via unum sanctum, review the frauds surrounding the misrepresented and so-called Louisiana Purchase and the wars against the Aboriginal Moors, Al-Moroccans, the true natural people of the land, and review the wars against the Washita, the Dugdamunye, and the ancient ones, or the ancient ones among the true heirs of the North Gate of Amexem. And now we address some points of interest concerning the Whigamores. On the 4th day of December of 1839, the Whigs held their national convention for selecting their candidate for president. That convention was held at Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and was about a year before the general election. The leading candidates were William Henry Harrison, who was a war hero and was also the most successful of the opponents of Van Buren in the election of 1836, and had been campaigning for the Whig nomination since that time. Another candidate was General Winfield Scott, who was a war hero of the War of 1812, and who was also known to have been very active in skirmishes with the British in 1837 and 1838. The third candidate was Henry Clay, who was the Whigs' congressional leader and former Speaker of the House. Important notation: to place the political and social reconstruction oriented acts and concepts into proper perspective, one must be aware that the practice of calling hybrid Europeans of the Paleolithic stock, quote unquote, white people, originated with the Whiggamore Party and their social political activities. A Whig is a member of the Patriotic Party during the Revolutionary War period and is a supporter of the Revolution. The expressive era of the Whigs Party is circa 1834 to 1855 and was formed in opposition to the Democratic Party, favoring a loose construction of the Constitution and of a high protective tariff. In British politics, a Whig is a member of a major political party located at Great Britain, which in general held liberal principles and favored reforms. Now, these Whigs were later called the Liberal Party. Whigs were also pertaining to or characteristic of members of a band of Scottish rebels and marched on Edinburgh in 1648. The Aboriginal Scots were and are Iberians, i.e., Moors. Because of the highly principled standards of jurisprudence expressed in the traditions and customs of the Moors, the Whigs Party members donned curly wigs to imitate or to associate with those said governmental and jurisdictional traditions and customs of the Moors. And these positive law principles are loosely referred to as, quote unquote, the common law. A veiling terminology was adopted for such adaptations and is noted as Whig, WHIG, plus black in parentheses, then a Moor. And so when you see the term black or Moor in history, this is where the connotation of black was adjusted to Moors, when the word black actually means pale colors, but actually to remove the people of the land from their right of supremacy relative to sovereignty and the people of the land. And when you come into the operations of the Revolutionary War and the reconstruction of the history, much of this politics is hidden from the people. So it is being shared with you tonight so that your concepts will be more attuned with the actuality of what's going on, as well as the motives of those persons who are operating in government, in the banking systems, in the pseudo dogmatic religious orders, all of which have been and are absolutely connected. The Whigs Party had nominated 3 party members as candidates for the presidency for the United States during the election of 1836. And none of these Whig candidates were successful. However, the aspiring participants did not succumb to discouragement. And in 1840, the Whigs Party nominated and supported William Henry Harrison for president, with John Tyler for vice president. This time, the Whigs won the executive office. Unfortunately, William Harrison died after 1 month in the presidential office. Horace Greeley, he's a very important figure that you must always keep in mind to understand the politics of today, including the Republican Party, including the operations, whereas the hybrid Europeans, starting at North America, began calling themselves white people. Horace Greeley, after giving support and taking part in the and we're going to put it in the context that some of you who are less erudite in jurisprudence can recognize and comprehend in relationship to your rights, your estates, your sentient being, and also to ward off much of the dark corruption that has been placed on humanity by the corrupted priesthood across planet Midgard. Now, as we're talking about land, for the sake of many of you who don't deal with jurisprudence or not aware of jurisprudence, we're going to go to Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition of Ancient and Modern Jurisprudence, and read it, and then we'll do some analysis, but we're also going to talk about its relationship to you and how it's also been used, pro or con, but mostly contrary to your best interest, as well as it has been taught to you that it is, and also how you're being robbed by the priesthood. So let's go to Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary of Ancient and Modern Jurisprudence. And so when you look at the contemporary world and the promotion of jurisprudence around the world, you will find that a major part of what is called nature's God, nature's law, or the common law of the ancient Sabian Moors has been promoted out into the world from ancient Phoenicia, or what you call Iberia, or what you call today Europe or Europa. And of course, most people aren't aware of in their geological or geological instructions that what is now called Europe is actually Iberian Peninsula and is actually Phoenicia. So most of our people, not knowing the real history of Asia and Africa, have been mentally and politically disconnected from Iberia by virtue of the German, Dutch German tribes, hybrid tribes that have been purging Europa, i.e., Iberia, for the last few hundred years. And so the concepts that people have in relationship to Iberia is that it is the homeland of the hybrid Europeans, when in fact that's not true. However, when you hear the statement that anthropologists speak of and historians and sociologists speak of when they refer to the practice of the German Dutch hybrid Europeans who have been falsely called in modern times as white people, understand that white is a status, it has nothing to do with complexion. Their concepts are that that's the home of the hybrid Europeans, not knowing that that's the homes of the Mores, Dubs, Picts, etc. All of these are Berber people within the Berber linguistic group, i.e., commonly known as Canaanites and Moors, etc. So, and universally known as Moors. And so the jurisprudence that we're speaking of actually has root in ancient African culture of balanced justice. So we're going to read from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition of Ancient and Modern Jurisprudence to give concepts, clarity concepts to those who are not aware of jurisprudence. Land. Land, in the most general sense, land comprehends any ground, any soil, or any earth whatsoever, as fields, as meadows, as pastures, as woods, as moors, as waters, as marshes, as furzes, and as heath. Land, in its more limited sense, land denotes the quantity and the character of the interest or estate which the tenant may own in land. And land may include any estate or interest in lands. It may be legal or equitable, and you also may reference easements or incorporeal hereditaments. So incorporeal hereditaments also deal with abstracts. So you can see the concepts that people have of land as they have been taught in general has been actually limited and heavily reduced. Of course, that has its political purpose. So technically, land signifies everything which may be holden, and the term is defined as comprehending all things of a permanent and substantial nature, and even of an unsubstantial, provided they be permanent. Now, originally, the term land is used as descriptive of the subject of ownership and not the ownership. The subject of ownership and not the ownership itself. Land includes not only the soil of earth or earth, but also things of a permanent nature, affixed thereto, or found therein, whether by nature, whether as water, trees, grass, herbage, other natural and perennial products, growing crops or trees, minerals under the surface, or by the hand of man, as buildings, fixtures, fences, hedges, bridges, as well as works constructed for use of water, such as dikes, canals, etc. So you can see when you're talking about land, you're also talking about incorporeal things. So you're also talking about traditions and customs of a people who have been established on land, and hereditaments, corporal and incorporeal. So that means inherited things also. So that means the abstract and the concrete. And as you all understand, land, as taught to the masses in general, under the auspices of colonial operations under the John D. Rockefeller institutions and the Frederick T. Gates institutions, which you know in the Western Hemisphere as the General Education Board, limits the concept of land to the people as simply being the soil. And now you know that it's not limited to that. And so also some things that we want to mention to you so that your concepts are clear is the misuse of dogmatic approach to religions for the purpose of blinding people as to how land is used, how it relates to you. As an example, Yahweh, or what you call, some people say Jehovah, YHWH, is actually the elements of the substance of the land and the abstract, essentially earth, air, fire, and water, all things that we build things from. Now, the people are told that that is the God being as an entity, while those who teach it know that it actually is the elements, earth, air, fire, and water. Um, Now, and when they mention Allah, they usually think the same way they look at Yahweh or Jehovah as the creator being, when actually Allah is actually the stargate or the gate of the womb or woman herself that brings life to the planet. And therefore, in the reality, the purity of woman and the principle of the divine womb is the only gateway by the physicality by which the physicality of man manifests on this earth. So therefore, whatever the state of mind of woman, whatever the condition that woman or the womb is in, has much to do with the product that she produces, or what, or and how what she brings to the gates of heaven, or to the earth, what they are, how they manifest, part of what the destiny of the being or the manifest is. And thus, whatever is born of woman has, in many ways, you might say, must submit to the will of Allah, because she is the creator of the physical form. And so when the priesthood usually teaches about Yahweh and Allah, they will teach the masses that these are different gods, yet the same God type thing, when actually all of these are aspects of the creative forces, etc., and not, and more in the transitive compartment of linguistic communication than actually the concept of the physical gods concepts that are taught to the masses for control purposes. And this is again why the priesthood will teach these different aspects of life and forms of life and that which makes up life in the both the abstract, or what people call the ethereal world, and some refer to it as the spiritual world, and then the three-dimensional physical world, etc. And all of it has relationship, but absolutely less so in the concepts that have been taught to the masses. And the masses, for the most part, are not aware that the priesthood, for the most part, is dirty, and that they have actually put the world in darkness for their own personal means. It's another reason why we're talking about land. And then you must also look at sea. So the sea, or the water, when you're looking at the cosmology of prophetic projection, or what you would call astrological calculation and projection, whether you're turning the clock forward or turning the clock back, and dealing with the geometry of the compass and the square, which is commonly referred to by people as the carpenter's tools that they talk to you about in the Septuaginta and the Bible, as Jesus being a carpenter. Of course, Jesus, anthropomorphic, is the man or the expression in the physical form, but in the cosmological nature, it is actually the Son of God, actually in the heavens, etc. And of course, the transits of the sun, and of course, the geometric calculations and positionings, or what you call the calculations of the position of the sun, the cycle placement of the sun in relationship to the cycle placement of the moon and the earth, and our calculations of the cause and effect. And this is what makes up the ephemeris that is at the basis of, or used mathematically to both do what you call charting. The wise men who have always followed the stars, etc., how they do projections, how they do prophecy mathematically according to the heavens, and also how they project or plan government operations, government structure, etc. And of course, while simplistic in its nature, in fact, it is often told to the people, or presented to the people, as something complex or super abstract. And so they just give some of that knowledge to the people in the anthropomorphic formats that they project in dogmatic religion. As most of you know, even when they're talking about the seven sisters, etc., or Santa Claus's, sleigh, you're simply talking about the lead star, which is or they're making reference to the lead star Sirius, it's often referred to as the dog star, and also Rudolph the reindeer's nose, etc. That's for children, but actually they're talking about Sirius, the dog star. And of course, that has much to do with cosmological culture on Earth. And this is also used as a guide also for navigation and operations on Midgard, etc. And also for traveling even when you're on the waters. Now, in reference to waters, with the Dark Priesthood using or misusing or misrepresenting Asiatic African culture and cosmology, Gnostic philosophies that actually is the foundation of the world's religions, for the sake of them continuing their corruption and power or on Midgard Earth. And this is where you will see where the Bible references the priesthood as claiming to be God, sitting themselves on the throne of God, claiming to be God, etc. And most of their activities are constructed around that political philosophy for ruling and abusing humanity. And then from an anthropomorphic perspective, as Abdul makes its way in the cycle of the cosmos with the entering of the Aquarian cycle or the Aquarian constellation. Therefore, you have what they call Jesus or justice comes again to bring justice. And so, from a philosophical point of view, for teaching, they will say Jesus means justice. Even though we know that there's no J in ancient Urdu or Berber linguistics, etc. You would say Yah, or the J would not exist until operative in linguistic form in the 1500s, lightly, and then more defined in the 1700s, etc. And so when people who know linguistics or have some knowledge of etymology and orthology, you will often hear them say, from a scholarly point of view, that there was no Jesus. What they're talking about, if there was no J operative in linguistic form 2,000 years ago, there would not be there would be no Jesus. What they're really talking about and what they're saying is actually that the Yah or the J is misrepresented, and they're not telling the truth about the anthropomorphic presentment of actually the eclipses of the sun, and the equinoxes of the sun, pardon me, and it's in its transits, etc., by which they navigate or formulate government, i.e., civilization. And also, when you hear them making references to separating Egypt from Africa, the people's concepts hoover around the idea that what they see jurisdictionally with the maps of modern Mappamundi, where they'll see Egypt definitely attached to Asia Sol or South Asia, i.e., Africa today, etc. It's obvious geographically that Egypt, which is Hikupta, is a part of Africa. But when they're making the reference of separating Egypt from Africa, the concept is the conquest of Egypt as a political jurisdiction in the modern day on the continent of Africa, as you see on the maps today. Actually, what they're referring to when they talk about separating Egypt from Africa, they're talking about Iberia and North, Central, and South America, which is actually Hikupta or Egypt, the Egyptian Empire, etc. And so people's minds usually go to just the pyramids or juntas or that you see in books or in stories, etc., on the continent of Africa as it is geographically spoken of today, and it never dawns on them that the series of pyramids exist all over the world, and in numbers, and in fact, you have more pyramids actually on the American continent than probably most of the Africa's on the other side. But people, when they're often looking at the geography, their concept does not ride with the fact that North, Central, South America, and the islands is still Egypt. Of course, when you get into your literary structures, say past say mid 1800s and back, you'll hear in a lot of written forms North America, and particularly the central part of Kentucky, Tennessee area, as Lower Egypt, etc. That's not uncommon, but you wouldn't hear them talking that way today because the politics constructs that the descendants of the land should be disinherited. And so the concept of separating Egypt from Africa um, in the minds of the people is limited to the other side when it's actually talking about most of the civilized world, and particularly North, Central, South America. Now, as far as the water is concerned, on another reason why we're talking about the land, because people, for the most part, don't look at land in relationship to hereditament, corporal and incorporeal. As a matter of fact, most people's minds never even go there. So the priesthood, when the after Napoleon Wars against Africa, etc., they took over actually the Vatican, etc., which most people in the modern days don't know is African. Their concepts have been that the Vatican's origin is with the hybrid Germanic tribes, when in fact it was not and is not. It was actually taken over. And the same structures of the Vatican, etc., you will find the same geographical or and architectural structures in Timbuktu, etc. So when the people see the Vatican in Iberia, you know, their concepts have been, according to Rockefeller instructions, that is hybrid Europeans. And many of our people don't know that when you're talking African history, you're talking Iberia too. So there's a mental disconnect. So the reclaiming of that which is the inherited right of the Picts and the Moors, etc., is indeed also the Vatican. So you have actually in the modern contemporary world where hybrid Germanic tribes have actually taken over the lands and the estates and the hereditaments of the Moors and have been claiming to be Moors. This is where you see, like in the Bible, as an example, in John 8:44, when the anthropomorphic Jesus says to the hybrids, say that if you were Abraham's children, you claim to be Abraham's children, yet if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham, but you seek to kill me, a man who is telling you the truth. And then he goes on to say that you are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abides not in the truth. And when he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own kind. And this is also where the designation of the hybrid Germanic tribes taking over the Moabite, Canaanite, Chaldean territories, etc., is used or promoted to separate in such a way that it separates the real heirs from the land, and then they put them in a political jurisdiction referred to as the Holy See. Now, the Holy See would be spelled SEE. And of course, you also know that the C is SEA. So the CSEA, dealing with the waters, implies the parting of the Red Sea by Musa, or by uh, the rulers of the high house of ancient Hykupta, And so the rulers of the high house will be referred to as the Ptah or the pharaohs, etc. And so this is where the hybrid German tribes are trying to kill off the Sabians or Saba, and they cover that up with the word or the term Jew. And this is where Jesus is talking about them claiming to be Jews and are not Jews that you see. But if you don't know the history, you wouldn't know the layered meanings of that phrase and what it's really telling you. Now, the many men and women who belong to many of the secret societies that operate at Midgard, some of them would be, say, like the Knights of Malta, Kyklos, Ku Klux Klan, White Camellia, P2 Masons, Illuminati, Thule Society, etc., etc. This is why all and many of them in their chambers of secret transfers of information and knowledge of the disciplines of humanity and the walks of men will wear the Moorish fez, which is the crown, or what is called corona sol, which means crown of the sun. And of course, you have the geometric science or construction of the fez, where you see the four sets of holes or perforations at the top of it in a circle with perforations of three sets of perforations surrounding the center. And you'll see perforations of 9, perforations of 12, and perforations of 18 wrapped one after the other in four corners. And of course, that's Yahweh, or earth, air, fire, and water. It's also the four gates of the earth. It's also the north, or the compass, how the compass and square is used to do radii and geometry. And then you have the umbilical cord, or the finial, in the center with a cord, and then you have the ball wrapped with strings, and they're dyed in ebony, and that would be the tassel, and that would represent the center of the universe, or the Earth center, and its rotation around the sun, and the tassels represent the degrees of the Earth in the spiral after the sun, or they say dancing around the sun, and this is degrees, and this is where you get day. So day, the word day comes from degrees. And as the earth dances or spirals behind the sun, you have in its rotationary movement, the dark or the day and the light. And so the ephemeris and your calendars, or your cycle placements, etc., that makes up what you call calendars, are generated or calculated by the study of the geometry of the position of the earth in its cycle spiraling behind the sun, where people will say the earth goes around the sun when actually it spirals behind the sun. And as the earth is spiraling behind the sun, the moon spirals around the earth sequentially in a rotation, whereas one side of the moon always shows to the earth. And so then you have, from that rotational calculation, what is known as the lunar calendar. And so basically, the calendars that are used to govern operations at Midgard are bicameral in fact. And so the calendar systems are actually based on the sun, the movement of the sun and the moon. And so, and then you have in different areas of Midgard, or the earth, you will see different peoples based on their positions on the earth that have practiced in some areas more leaning to the lunar calendar, and in some in your more modern or contemporary operations, making the people only aware of the sun or solar calendar, when actually the operations are bicameral. And so you must also recognize that the priesthood, in order to maintain their corruption, will not tell the general public this. while they use this knowledge for their personal selves. And so when our people are seeking to go back to the principles of our ancient mothers and fathers and study African culture, they must be aware of the lunar calendar as well as the solar calendar, and also recognize that when you're looking at ancient Egypt, etc., you're looking at ancient America. And so, in order to cut the people's knowledge off of ancient America, they will not tell the people that America is ancient Egypt, and not just on the other side. Those are connected, and that the soil of the Gulf of Mexico and of the land of flowers that you call Florida, etc., and the coast of Carolina, North, Central, or South Georgia, etc. Those areas are the soil is identical, absolutely identical to the soils of North Africa on the other side. Um, so they don't want people to know that there was a connection before the great shift or the great cocoa plate shift, or what they call in the reconstructed history as the continental drift. Because one of the things that they want to constantly promote is to mentally separate the Africans from Africa, Asia soul, because they're splitting the people, or what you call projecting schismata, in order to maintain unum sanctum conquest operations. So, from a political perspective, the divisions that you see among African people is actually promoted by the priesthood under the unum sanctum operations. And so, this is again why most politicians and priesthood, whether they claim Judaism, whether they claim Islam, or whether they claim Christianity, will promote under the pretext that America is separate from Africa. And most of them are networked, and people aren't aware that what they've been looking at as their so-called priesthood are actually directly in a brotherhood connection with the politicians, and that the politicians also are priests. And this is why you see, once you start doing a little research, whether you're dealing with the hybrid Europeans, or you're dealing with the or Aboriginal Europeans, etc., you will see certain correlations in what they would refer to as, the Grand Lodge of England, London, etc., Europeans in their fraternal orders, and also what you call Prince Hall Masons of people of African descent, being made subordinate by charter under the hybrid Europeans, and yet all of them are wearing Moorish fezzes and then pretending that they don't know who the Moors are. And whenever they make reference to the Moors, the founders of civilization, in a public forum, they will always call them black, or they'll call us Indians, etc. Now, when they make reference to the Moors as Indians, understand they're talking about the Naga, or the high priest order coming from ancient Eritrea, where your first churches were. They'll tell the people that the first churches, etc., was in Abyssinia, or what you call Ethiopia. Ethiopia, but actually your first churches were in Eritrea, and you'll find that in your Bible, in the book in Acts, for those who doubt what I just now said to you. And of course, church does not mean the building in the sense that the people have been told. Church actually comes from the ancient Samskrita or Samskrita. They'll say Sanskrit, which is church, which is the great circle, which is really the zodiac, which is also commonly referred to as the geometric calculations and workings of Isis and Horus, or the study of Isis and Horus in the nature of the beings on the planet, and the founding of civilization and the walk of man, also referred to as mother and son, also referred as masonry in the modern world. And so one of the reasons why the priesthood also promote a negative view of mother and son study or masonry is because they don't want the people to look at it objectively and find out that the priesthood have actually been lying to the people, and that the demonology that humanity has been suffering from didn't come from some mystical devil. It actually came from the corrupt and organized priesthood, irregardless of what versions they claim. And of course, this dirtiness and corruption, by virtue of fact and by default, logically plays out in the political realm. And so by the masses not knowing that the politicians are priests, because they're not told that, they think these are separate and different categories of men doing different stuff. And so therefore the people have what you call limited defense, because as soon as one of the dark priests says Jesus, God, Allah, Moses, Muhammad, Yahweh, Jehovah, the people get starry-eyed and give them their lunch money. And they've been getting over with this for quite some time. And now the anthropomorphic projection story